Americans are given the most important right, and they are not using that right effectively. And that right is to vote. As an American citizen who's been able to vote for 10 years, who's done a lot of research on the importance of voting, I've seen how it can negatively or positively affect certain communities based on the policies. It is critical for us Americans to know the importance of voting because it can affect you personally. Every single vote counts, and we are voting in a democracy. And I'm going to explain to you why it's important that we vote. It's the first reason it's important is because we are voting in a democracy. So we vote for the policies. And the policies determine our everyday lives. And depending on what you vote on, it can positively or negatively affect the community. So voting on these policies is vital that you vote for the policy that affects you personally. Our nation was actually also built on the ability to vote. In Article 1 of the Constitution, it states that the Senate and House of Representatives will be elected by voting. In James Madison's speech on suffrage, he states that the right of suffrage is a fundamental article in the Republic constitutions. The regulation of it, as it is, at the same time, a task of peculiar delicacy. Allow the right to vote to property owners, and the right of persons may be opposed. Extend equally to all, and the rights of property owners may be overruled by a majority without property. So this quote is explaining how voting has been made an important part of our history starting from the 1700s, and it's important in our American history. It's also very important because it can affect you personally. Policies affect minorities, and minorities can be you. A clear pattern has established over time where laws are made to affect and suppress those who are not in power. For example, in the late 1980s, a big drug epidemic in America affected mostly minority populations. Lawmakers rushed to enact harsh penalties on nonviolent offenders and filled our prison systems with mostly minority offenders. As the authors of the journal article Crack in the Rearview Mirror, Deconstructing Drug War Mythology, Craig Neinerman and Harry Levine, they both state, it is now clear that the laws rushed through Congress during the crack scare in the late 1980s had political purposes and racist consequences. This quote is stating how they used this drug epidemic as a personal vendetta for certain races and were able to get people that they didn't like in prison pretty much because of this big epidemic, and they used it, which is why it's important to vote on policies and not let those in charge affect everything. Not voting also results in underrepresentation of certain groups that you could be a part of. An article in National Geographic titled Why It's Important to Vote states, a Portland State University found that fewer than 15% of eligible voters were turning out to vote for mayors, council members, and other local offices. Low turnout means that important local issues are determined by a limited group of voters, making a single vote more statistically meaningful. This quote explains why it's important for you to vote, because statistically, every single vote matters, and low turnouts are affecting these policies. And it's important that every single person go out and vote for what they believe in. It's also important to know the strategies for voting. So know your candidates, do your research, make sure that the candidate you are voting for stands for what you personally believe in. Also know your dates and your locations of the local polling stations. So check newspapers, news stations, and other sources for the locations of the polling stations and the dates that it's available in your city and state. So now that you can see how important voting is, it's important you get out there and make a change for your country.